Okay, so let's unpack this. We are diving into some pretty deep philosophical territory today.
We really are.
And it's a view that I think fundamentally redefines the relationship between, well, the teacher, the student.
And the content they share, right, the whole dynamic.
The whole thing. It's this view that posits learning is just a profoundly human act, rooted in compassion. And it starts with a question that seems simple, but it's incredibly profound. Are we teaching English or are we teaching humans?
And that question, which really is the hook for our source material today, it just perfectly captures the spirit of humanism in education.
It really does.
I mean, if you're looking for a philosophy that is genuinely learner-centered, that's focused on personal meaning and driven by compassion, this is it. It moves us so far beyond just, standardized tests and curriculum maps.
Absolutely. So this deep dive is all about that approach. We're drawing from the work Teaching the Whole Child, Humanism in Education. And the mission here really is to shift the spotlight entirely. We're moving the focus off the syllabus, the what and, completely onto the person sitting in that desk, the who. We're exploring how academic learning is just. It's completely tied to emotion, to personal growth, and the whole complex human experience.
And our mission then is to really understand the practical day-to-day implications of that. Because it's easy to say teach the whole child, but what does that actually look like?
Right.
It means you have to understand that the student isn't just a repository for information. They are this complex system of feelings, of fears, of dreams, and a deeply individual set of needs. And you have to address those needs for any real learning to happen.
And that's what makes this so critical right from the start.
Yeah.
Our source really highlights this undeniable fact that students just do not learn in a vacuum.
Not at all.
The old model sort of pretended you could, just isolate the intellectual part of the brain and train it and ignore everything else. Humanism comes along and says that's just impossible. You can't separate a student's internal state, their anxiety, their life at home, their sense of belonging, from their ability to actually engage with the material and succeed. They're inseparable.
And if you accept that premise, and I mean, the psychological evidence is overwhelming that we should, then the entire framework of teaching just shifts.
Completely.
We're no longer just, content delivery specialists. We become facilitators of human growth. And that realization, it forces us to look at the powerful psychological roots of this whole movement. This philosophy isn't just built on optimism. It's based on some really rigorous psychological study.
So let's get into those roots, because you're right. Humanism in education isn't just a collection of nice ideas. It's really rooted in the groundbreaking work of two giants of 20th century psychology. The ones who basically launched what they called the third force of psychology in reaction to behaviorism and psychoanalysis, Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers.
That is the essential starting point. You really can't appreciate humanistic education without understanding that intellectual foundation they provided. Their ideas, they sparked a genuine revolution. They argued so vehemently against this idea of humans as just, passive reactors to things happening around them.
Right.
Instead, they put our internal experience, our motivation, our innate drive for fulfillment right at the center. They argued that learning is fundamentally intrinsically connected to emotion, to growth, and to the entire human experience.
And this belief, this transformative idea, it just fundamentally challenges the traditional structure of education. It completely rejects that historical view of the learner as a tabula rasa.
A blank slate.
A blank slate waiting to be written on.
Yeah.
Or some kind of purely rational engine that we just load up with data. Maslow and Rogers said emphatically, no.
No.
Students learn as people complex, messy, sometimes irrational, not just as intellectual vessels waiting to be filled up.
And that really is the big foundational shift. When you start teaching the human, the goal changes so dramatically. It moves away from just standardized intellectual achievement.
Passing the test.
Exactly, just passing the test, to genuine psychological and personal development, to what Maslow called self-actualization. And this focus, this idea that the emotional and physical state of the student is a prerequisite for intellectual development, that's the foundation of the whole child philosophy. If we ignore those fundamental needs, we don't just slow down learning. We actively compromise it.
Yeah.
Entirely.
But let's pause here, because this brings up an immediate point of, let's say, intellectual friction. This is a deep dive, right? Our audience is curious, they're well-informed, they probably know Maslow and Rogers.
Sure.
So let's move beyond the basics. What does the educational application of these theories tell us that, a general knowledge of Maslow's pyramid might miss?
That's an excellent challenge. And it requires us to really get into the practical reality of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I mean, most people can list the 5 tiers, sure, but the humanist educator focuses on the concept of deficit needs. He called them D needs versus growth needs or B needs.
Being needs.
Being needs, right? And the powerful realization here is that the lower 4 tiers are all D needs, deficit needs. When they are not met, the individual, the student, is motivated by a sense of lack, a deficit. And that deficit state is just incompatible with curiosity, with risk-taking, with complex cognitive processing.
So Maslow's hierarchy, this foundational pillar, isn't just a metaphor for human motivation. For a humanistic educator, it's a critical diagnostic tool.
Precisely.
The essential premise, which, let's be honest, is often dismissed in high-pressure school settings, is that learners must have their basic deficit needs met before they can even begin to engage with the growth needs required for learning at the highest level.
Exactly. And we need to detail these layers and their immediate practical and often overlooked relevance in a school environment. So let's start at the very bottom. Physiological needs.
These are the non-negotiables, right? Food, sleep, shelter, basic biological safety. How does the humanistic framework translate these into actual educational policy and practice?
Okay, so in a non-humanistic model, a hungry student is just a disruptive student or a slow student. That's the label they get. In the humanistic model, we recognize that a child coming to school hungry or severely sleep-deprived is operating from a survival instinct. Neurochemically, their brain is prioritizing basic needs over, the higher cortical functions like memory retrieval or problem solving.
It has to.
It has to. So a humanistic school sees providing robust, stigma-free breakfast and lunch programs or advocating for later school start times to address how teenagers sleep. They don't see these as extracurricular social work. They see them as fundamental curriculum enablement.
Right. Without these, the learning just can't happen effectively.
It can't.
Okay, so moving up to the second tier. Safety and security. We often think of this as physical safety, which is, of course, crucial, but what about the psychological dimension?
The psychological safety is absolutely paramount for a humanist. It means the environment has to be predictable, it has to be stable, and it has to be free from emotional or psychological threat.
So if a student is constantly terrified of being called out or humiliated for giving the wrong answer?
Exactly. Or navigating unpredictable discipline, their brain is in a chronic state of threat assessment. They can't focus on the lesson. They'll engage in avoidance behaviors, slumping down, not making eye contact, just tuning out completely. The humanistic teacher makes sure that taking a risk is safe and that the emotional boundaries of the classroom are clear and secure.
Okay, now we're hitting the mid-levels, the social needs.
Yeah.
Love and belonging. This is where the emotional architecture of the class really starts to take shape.
And belonging is maybe the most critical mid-tier D need in a school setting. If a student feels like an outsider, unseen, unheard, disconnected from their peers or their teacher, their entire mental apparatus is dedicated to finding connection.
Not to algebra.
Not to algebra, no. Humanism asserts that belonging is actually a cognitive enabler. Research confirms this. When students feel socially supported, they exhibit better executive function. So the humanistic classroom is structured specifically to foster a genuine community, to make every single student feel valued for who they are.
And right above that is esteem needs. This ties into feeling competent, that internal feeling of self-worth.
And this is often missed. Esteem isn't just about feeling good. It's about feeling capable and feeling respected by others and by yourself. If a student's efforts are constantly belittled, or if they're only recognized for some innate talent, which feels fixed, they develop what Carol Dweck called a fixed mindset. The humanistic educator ensures that esteem is built through recognized competence, by celebrating the process of improvement, the effort, the perseverance, rather than just the final high-stakes outcome. This really helps mitigate issues like imposter syndrome, which can paralyze even high-achieving learners.
Okay, so once these 4 deficit needs, physiological, safety, belonging, and esteem are addressed, the humanistic framework says the student is finally ready for the pinnacle, for self-actualization.
This is the destination. This is where true, deep, transformative learning happens. Maslow defined it as the desire to become the most authentic, complete, and best version of oneself. In an educational context, this is where students operate out of B needs. Those being needs like truth, goodness, beauty, justice. Learning becomes intrinsically motivated. It's driven by a search for meaning.
What's fascinating, and often overlooked in the intro texts, is the consequence of failing to reach this pinnacle. Maslow had a term for the psychological issues that come up when those B needs are denied, right?
Exactly. He called them metapathologies. While deficit needs lead to immediate, visible symptoms like hunger or anxiety, the failure to self-actualize leads to these subtle but really corrosive issues.
Like what?
Cynicism, boredom, aimlessness, feelings of meaninglessness, a real lack of passion. And the powerful takeaway for education is this. If a student is constantly focused on just passing tests or just complying with external demands, they are denied the chance to engage in self-actualization.
And that leads to profound dissatisfaction.
And ultimately, academic burnout, even among so-called successful students. Learning only truly flourishes when all of these human needs are honored, all the way up through the highest tiers of potential.
That just significantly elevates the teacher's role. It's not just a curriculum delivery agent anymore. It's a diagnostic expert who is managing the entire human ecosystem of the classroom.
It is.
But this raises a critical challenge. How does one teacher manage this level of personalized attention for 30, 35 students? Doesn't this philosophy, as beautiful as it is, ultimately break down under the weight of just sheer class size?
That is the perennial challenge, and it's where the next philosophical foundation, the work of Carl Rogers, gives us the practical structure. You're right, humanism is difficult to scale perfectly, but Rogers gives us the high-leverage tools, the mindset shifts, that allow one teacher to create a supportive environment for many.
So, if Maslow gave us the map for human needs and motivation, then Carl Rogers provided the architecture for the emotional environment required to meet those needs. Let's transition to that emotional cornerstone of humanism.
Rogers established emotional well-being not just as a nice goal, but as a mechanism for learning. His work, which came largely from his client-centered therapy, focused on the necessary conditions for a person to shed their defenses and achieve real personal growth. And he distilled these down to 3 core conditions that educators must cultivate.
Right, and those are acceptance, empathy, and the big one, the defining phrase of his work, unconditional positive regard. So let's unpack the technical difficulty of actually achieving these, especially that last one.
So acceptance means receiving the student exactly as they are, including their current struggles, their flaws, their unique history. Empathy is the active, non-judgmental process of trying to see the world from the student's internal frame of reference. It's not sympathy, oh, you poor thing. It's profound understanding.
And unconditional positive regard, UPR. This means valuing the student inherently. Valuing their being, regardless of their performance, their grades, or their, frustrating behavior on a particular Tuesday afternoon.
Right.
You are valued simply because you are a human being with innate potential.
And that word unconditional is precisely where the rubber meets the road. A traditional system is conditional. You get my regard if you get an A, or if you behave properly. Humanism challenges the teacher to maintain that regard even when the student is challenging or resistant or failing. And this is only possible if the teacher is practicing the most foundational of Rogers' concepts, congruence.
Let's talk more about congruence. That's a sophisticated concept that's often left out of the simple explanations of Rogers.
Congruence is authenticity. It means the teacher is genuine, transparent, and integrated. Their external presentation matches their internal feelings. Rogers believed that if a teacher tries to fake kindness, or if they appear helpful but are secretly judgmental,
The student will know.
the student will sense the incongruence and trust will completely break down. Congruence is the backbone of UPR. A teacher who is congruent is a trustworthy model of authenticity, which then encourages the student to be authentic themselves and drop their own defensive masks.
This just redefines the teacher's role so dramatically. You're no longer an instructor delivering content, but a supportive, authentic presence who is willing to be emotionally available.
The teacher's daily actions, they shift entirely. They have to practice active, deep listening. Listening not just to the words, but to the feeling underneath. They have to notice shifts in a student's mood or disposition, and they must model genuine care. The humanistic goal is to create profound emotional safety, to allow students to express confusion, to express failure, even vulnerability without that crippling fear of judgment or punishment.
But let's go back to that friction point again. If a student is being actively disruptive, yelling, throwing things, shutting down the entire learning environment, how does a humanistic teacher apply UPR and empathy without just, enabling the misbehavior? This is where many traditional systems say humanism is too soft.
And that's a crucial distinction. UPR does not mean unconditional approval of behavior. It means unconditional acceptance of the person.
Okay.
The humanistic response to disruptive behavior is to shift the focus from punishment to exploration. The question changes from how do I stop this behavior to what unmet need, probably rooted in Maslow's deficit hierarchy, is driving this behavior.
So the teacher becomes a kind of detective looking for the root cause.
Exactly. They might use a technique called reflective listening, a classic Rogerian tool to validate the student's feeling, even while setting boundaries on the behavior.
How would that sound?
Something like, I see you are incredibly frustrated right now, and I understand you're upset about the assignment, but yelling is not acceptable in this room. Let's step outside so we can figure out what you need to be able to work.
So you address the behavior.
But you honor the person and their unmet needs. This deep engagement is what drives self-actualization because it tells the student, your whole being is relevant here, even your anger.
Okay, so moving on from emotional safety, the humanist classroom puts a tremendous amount of weight on the concept of agency, which brings us to empowering the learner through autonomy and that shift toward intrinsic motivation.
Student autonomy is, it's just non-negotiable within humanism. It's founded on this belief that humans have an innate internal drive for growth. Therefore, students learn best when they have a voice, when they are trusted to make choices, to plan, and to take genuine responsibility for their own learning path.
So why does humanism see student choice as not just a perk, but an essential element of high-quality learning? Because in a lot of curriculum-driven models, choice is seen as simply sacrificing instructional time.
The difference is really in the psychological outcome. When learning is imposed entirely from the outside, fixed syllabus, fixed methods, fixed assessment, it triggers what psychologists call reactance. It feels forced. Engagement becomes transactional. Autonomy, on the other hand, it taps into our fundamental human need for self-determination.
This sounds like we're getting into self-determination theory, which feels very compatible with the humanistic view.
We are. SDT, which was developed by the psychologists DC and Ryan, it proposes that intrinsic motivation really flourishes when three basic psychological needs are met. Competence feeling capable, relatedness feeling connected, which ties right back to Rogers and Maslow's belonging,
And the third one.
and autonomy feeling in control of one's own actions. The humanistic classroom is built to maximize all three, but autonomy is the lever that transforms compliance into real ownership.
And when students have ownership, the learning becomes meaningful and self-guided.
That's it.
But how does a teacher implement this without it all descending into classroom chaos? I mean, if you give high school students total autonomy, they might just choose to do nothing, or at least choose the easiest possible path.
And that's the challenge of scaffolding autonomy. It's not anarchy, it's guided choice. Our source material gives some great examples of how teachers manage this. Autonomy can be procedural, so the student chooses how they demonstrate their learning. A presentation, a paper, a podcast, whatever. Or it can be substantive. The student chooses what they study, but within a given framework.
Let's look at those concrete examples from the source. How is this managed day to day?
Well, on the procedural level, it looks like teachers providing curated menus for major projects. So instead of a single mandatory essay topic, a student might select from a list of project types, a research paper, a documentary script, a series of blog posts, as long as they meet the same core learning objective. It involves allowing students to select reading materials that genuinely resonate with their interests, even if they're outside the traditional canon, provided the complexity is appropriate. And crucially, it involves the student planning their own learning goals for a unit, often with the teacher, and then using reflection journals to honestly evaluate their progress.
So it makes learning an active contract, not just a passive imposition.
Exactly.
And this empowerment is the engine for intrinsic motivation, which is the gold standard of humanistic learning.
Intrinsic motivation is the ultimate self-sustaining goal. It's learning for the sake of curiosity, for interest, for personal desire. It's totally divorced from the fear of a bad grade or the allure of some reward. The risk of that extrinsic pressure grades, rewards, public rankings, is that once you take the reward away, the learning just stops. Extrinsic pressure can actually crowd out intrinsic motivation.
So what specific strategies do humanistic teachers use to cultivate that deeply rooted internal love of learning that lasts long after the class is over?
One of the most subtle but really transformative strategies is just how feedback is delivered. Instead of praising perfection, you got an A, you're so smart, they praise effort and the process. This is called process praise.
So instead you'd say something like,
I noticed you revised this paragraph 3 times, and that focus you had on using stronger verbs made a significant difference in the impact of your argument.
that shifts the student's focus from am I inherently smart, to what effort did I put in and what process did I follow that led to this growth?
Exactly. It reinforces the growth mindset. It tells the student that intelligence is changeable, not static. Second, humanists prioritize offering meaningful tasks instead of what we all remember as busy work.
Right.
Meaningful tasks are ones that have a clear connection to real-life problems or personal ethics. If a task feels like you're just checking a box for the teacher, intrinsic motivation just vanishes. But if the task involves collaborating with peers to solve a genuine local problem, engagement spikes.
And the third strategy, which ties back to that personal journey, is the constant quest to connect learning to personal relevance.
Absolutely. If the teacher can successfully show that a seemingly abstract concept, say statistical correlation or ancient philosophy, has a direct bearing on a student's current concerns or their goals or their ethical view of the world, the motivation instantly becomes internal. It engages that unique, self-actualizing journey. By fostering autonomy and encouraging that intrinsic drive, humanism ensures the learning isn't just retained, but it generates a lasting, lifelong appetite for knowledge.
Okay, so we've established the theoretical framework. We've got Maslow providing the motivational blueprint,
Right.
Rogers providing the relational environment, and autonomy providing the empowerment structure. So let's talk about the practical reality. What does it actually look and feel like inside a humanistic classroom, beyond just choice and kind words?
The daily practices are really a mirror of those core psychological beliefs. A humanistic teacher begins every academic pursuit by prioritizing the creation of a strong, healthy culture. This means dedicating real time to building genuine relationships, showing authentic curiosity about individual student stories, and just maintaining a warm, predictable environment where respect is the baseline currency.
It sounds like the culture of the room is seen as the curriculum's foundation, not just some byproduct of it.
Absolutely. The classroom culture is the instructional vehicle. When the culture is safe, the high-level cognitive work can actually begin. And the source highlights several specific activities that are hallmarks of this philosophy because they facilitate self-discovery and that integration of emotion and intellect.
Give us some detail on those activities. How do they integrate the human side with the academic side?
Okay, take journaling and reflection. In a humanistic setting, this isn't just creative writing. It's a dedicated space for metacognition. Students are processing their own feelings, their anxieties, their learning struggles, right alongside their academic progress. It's integration work.
I struggled with this concept because I was worried about my presentation, but I persevered because my peer group supported me. And the emphasis on creative expression, that must tie directly into Maslow's B needs, the need for beauty and self-expression.
Indeed. Creative expression, poetry, visual art, dramatic performance, building a prototype. It allows students to communicate complex ideas and emotions through non-traditional, highly personal means. It honors the fact that not all learning is best demonstrated on a standardized written test.
Right.
We also see frequent use of structured group dialogue and peer support, things like restorative justice circles or collaborative learning teams, that make the knowledge flow in multiple directions, not just from the teacher down.
This leads to that structural transformation we mentioned earlier. It's no longer a top-down command and control classroom.
It fundamentally shifts from a hierarchy to a community. In the traditional model, the teacher is the authority, the source, dispensing knowledge, and the student's job is passive reception. In the humanistic community, the teacher changes roles entirely. They become a facilitator of growth, a resource manager, a curriculum curator. Their job is to guide the exploration and manage the safety of the environment, not to dictate every single step. And this shared authority builds responsibility and ownership in the learner.
And this shift in authority must completely reframe the way the system deals with assessment and the fear of failure, which is arguably the biggest psychological barrier to true risk-taking and deep learning.
That is perhaps the most transformative practical application of humanism. It radically reevaluates the nature of error. Humanism encourages students to take intellectual risks, even if they result in failure, because mistakes are reframed as essential moments of learning and data points for iteration.
Not sources of shame or punishment.
Exactly.
So how does assessment change under this philosophy? Do they just stop giving grades?
Not necessarily stop, but they shift the focus of assessment. They prioritize descriptive, constructive feedback over punitive grades, especially during the learning process. They might use techniques like self-assessment or portfolio assessment, where the student tracks and reflects on their own growth over time. The goal is to move students away from relying on external validation, the grade, and toward internal mastery and self-evaluation.
The ultimate message to the student is, your growth happened because you were willing to try and fail, not in spite of it.
That's the core resilient mindset that humanism develops. It creates an iterative learner who sees challenges as opportunities, not as dead ends. And that resilient, internally motivated learner is the kind of person who can navigate a really unpredictable modern world.
So we've covered the entire scope here, from the deep psychological roots of Maslow and Rogers all the way to the practical structure of the autonomous classroom. So in synthesis, what is the ultimate powerful goal that humanism seeks to achieve?
I think the power of humanism lies in its profound belief that education is not simply about acquiring content. It's fundamentally about identity formation. It's about who students become as empathetic, self-aware, functioning adults. The curriculum serves the development of the person. The person does not exist to serve the curriculum.
And this focus on the inner curriculum, as you could call it, means humanism emphasizes a very specific set of desired outcomes that go way beyond rote memory or standardized test scores.
Exactly. It emphasizes core human qualities that are increasingly valuable in a globalized creative economy. Empathy, robust confidence that's rooted in real competence, acute self-awareness, and emotional resilience.
Right.
These are the traits that equip a student not just to get a job, but to live a successful, meaningful, contributing life. Humanism fully recognizes that the learning process is deeply personal and that every student's path to their potential is unique and has to be respected.
And that recognition brings us directly to the relevance of this philosophy for today. We live in a highly pressured, competitive, information-saturated world. Why does humanism matter right now in this climate?
The relevance is, I think, urgent and essential. We are seeing epidemic levels of stress, anxiety, and mental health challenges among young people and young adults. The traditional high-stakes, purely achievement-based model often makes this crisis worse by focusing entirely on external validation and ignoring all those deficit needs that Maslow warned us about. Humanistic education provides a vital counter-narrative, a practical solution.
It reminds us.
It reminds us powerfully that the heart, the emotional life, and the sense of meaning matter just as much as the intellect.
It really does offer a compassionate and realistic path for classrooms where diversity, mental health, and student well-being aren't just seen as, side programs, but are baseline, integrated parts of instruction.
It serves as a necessary structural challenge to the educational system's current defaults. It demands that we as educators, parents, policymakers, everyone, stop viewing students merely as test scores, academic labels, or future economic inputs.
Right.
Instead, humanism insists we see them as full, complex human beings whose ultimate potential is just waiting to unfold, provided we meet those fundamental requirements of safety and self-worth first.
When you look at the increasing psychological fragility in our systems, humanism just offers a desperately needed framework. It argues that the most successful, durable, and beneficial learning happens when we stop trying to fix the academic outcome directly, and instead focus all our energy on nurturing the human foundation underneath it.
It's the philosophy that reminds us that competence is built on safety, and meaning is built on acceptance.
So this deep dive has really explored that transformative shift from focusing on the subject, the curriculum, to focusing on the whole child, the complex, emotional, self-directed human being.
Right.
And ultimately, our source material argues that when we successfully make that shift, learning stops being merely informational. It becomes richer, deeper, and genuinely transformative.
And we've covered these incredible foundations rooted in the psychology of Maslow and Rogers, and understanding these principles is so crucial. This is really the first step in a larger philosophical exploration within our source material, which next moves into the challenging world of existentialism.
An approach focused on radical freedom and choice.
And creating personal meaning in a chaotic world, yes.
But before we move on to those radical ideas, let's just sit for a moment with this core concept of Maslow's foundational hierarchy. We all have personal and professional goals we're striving for, right? Our own forms of self-actualization. We push toward the pinnacle of our careers. We seek those B needs like creative fulfillment and recognition.
But the humanistic lesson is that the pinnacle rests on a stable foundation of those D needs.
Precisely. So we have to ask ourselves a closing question. A challenge for every lifelong learner tuning in right now. If emotional safety, belonging, and physiological stability are the non-negotiable foundations for self-actualization, the necessary conditions for success, then what are the subtle ways we, as professional adults, often neglect Maslow's lower-tier principles in our own lives?
That's a powerful question.
Are we trying to build a career at a pinnacle while systematically ignoring our own needs for rest, for connection, and for psychological safety? Are we creating our own professional metapathologies in the process? Something profound to think about as you prioritize your own learning and growth this week.